Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rockerbox Summer Camp. I would love to introduce a few team members from Bamboo, Alison Danforth, who is our Director of Growth Marketing, and Malik Lopez, who is our Senior Growth Marketing Manager. Thank you for attending our Benchmarking for Efficient Growth session. We're excited to kick off and take it away, Alison.
Great. Thanks so much, Bailey, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here with you all today on day one of summer officially and Rockerbox Summer Camp. As Bailey mentioned, I'm Alison Danforth. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing here at Bamboo, and I'm located in Seattle. And the sun did come out today, which is awesome. It was rainy yesterday. I was a little concerned, but it feels like the first day of summer. So excited to kick this off. So when we talk about benchmarking, it's important to understand there are so many steps that happen before we get to the point of actually utilizing benchmarks. So in our time today, we'll first highlight the processes to get ready for benchmarks, specifically how to set up your account for efficient growth, and then how to benchmark and scale from there. So we'll cover the how-tos of efficient growth and why we at Bamboo believe this is crucial in your growth program. We'll dive into how we approach foundational measurement utilizing Rockerbox and setting up our account structure for success. We'll cover best practices for advertising and specifically how benchmarking plays a crucial role in your efficient growth program. And then finally, how to scale your program from there. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But first, I'm going to back up because we've said efficient a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about what efficient growth means to Bamboo. So at Bamboo, we really focus on this word efficient, which is how we work with our clients to determine not only how to grow and scale, but to make your programs effective and sustainable. So what is efficient growth? We believe it's really the opposite of growth at all costs, which means that we focus on how to incorporate cost efficiency into our growth models. The word growth, as many of you know, is not synonymous with profitability or sustainability at your company. So there's a trade-off that comes with focusing solely on growth, which is at some point growth could slow or profits could take a hit. So do you really want to grow faster or more efficiently? How do you foster a healthy balance while still hitting your goals? While we want to help our clients scale, we want to make sure that that scale doesn't take off just to be shut down when the business can't sustain it. So this is why we focus on this concept of efficient growth. So at Bamboo, we really do feel like this is a way to ensure our clients can not only grow, but grow for the long haul. We don't want to focus on short win sales tactics or quick turnarounds to hinder our potential for long-term success. So we really focus on understanding the metrics and tactics that plan for long-term success with our clients. So where does that start? At Bamboo, we think that this is kind of in a strong pyramid foundation. If we look here, we classify our efforts kind of into four main categories: foundational measurement, account structure, best practices, and scale. A strong measurement source and alignment on the data we're evaluating against is the baseline for a successful advertising program. Without data that matters at the source of our program, everything else we do won't ultimately achieve our goals because our goals weren't determined on an accurate or solid foundation. Not because we can't keep scaling and growing, but that ultimately we're measured on something that doesn't align with the performance that we have. So once we have this foundation in place, then we can focus on ensuring our account structure is sound so we can streamline budgets and reports and performance. We'll follow best practices for each channel. And then from there, we're able to scale and grow more confidently because we actually set up our campaigns for success at the core. So we'll dive into each of these categories at a high level today, but where we're really going to focus on in this pyramid is the best practices. So this is where benchmarking comes to play in your program. Once your measurement and structure are in a solid place, following channel best practices and benchmarking them against yourself is a crucial step in understanding how you can continue to scale and grow from here. We'll be focusing on the value that benchmarking offers your program, the types of benchmarks to utilize, and then how to leverage them success. But I'll kick it off to Malik to discuss some foundational measurement and how we've used Rockerbox specifically as a strong foundation for our clients.
Awesome. Thanks, Alison. So before I begin and dive into foundational measurement, I just want to note the little efficient pyramid on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That will be there for the duration of the presentation. And as we reach different topics or different levels of the growth pyramid, that'll be indicated by that section being highlighted in brown. So back to foundational measurement. Since foundational measurement is usually such a big topic here at Bamboo, I wanted to include the full scope of what we normally consider, everything from the how, the what, and the why of measurement, because we're not going to be diving into every aspect today. We have plenty of those topics in other sessions for summer camp, but specifically for this, for the purposes of this benchmarking session, we're just going to be discussing a subsection of KPIs, which is measurement. We'll talk about multi-touch attribution and Rockerbox, and then we'll come full circle and talk about something that's very important for setting targets, and that's, of course, benchmarks. So on the topic of foundational measurement, attribution can't be understated. This is a very simple illustration here that we have in order to drive home the point of what multi-touch attribution could actually do for clients and what it's done for our clients. Now, as you know, there are many different types of attribution that a lot of marketers have traditionally used, but for the sake of this example, we'll use last touch attribution there on the left to compare it to multi-touch on the right. So what last touch does is it assigns 100% of the credit to the last marketing touch point and under attributes all of the other touch points, giving us an unclear picture of what's driving conversions. Whereas with multi-touch, we're of course able to assign fractional credit to all touch points and give us a better picture of what is driving conversions and outcomes. So now zooming out a little bit more, we're going to walk through a quick example of the full picture of what Rockerbox was able to actually do for one of our clients, in addition to establishing and giving us the ability to report with fractional attribution. So on the left there, you see what Rockerbox was able to unlock for us versus on the right, you see what the client's traditional measurement was. And specifically, Rockerbox was able to give us, as you see, fractional attribution, unlock view-based tracking, give us insights into a full user journey, give us conversion value, surprisingly. Their old reporting system didn't report on that. And then most importantly, give us data deduplication. Now, fractional attribution, we discussed the importance of that on the last slide, but view-based tracking was very important because that actually helped us to test into new channels such as Snapchat and TikTok due to the integration that they have and the view-based conversions that we were now able to measure. The full user journey was important because that provided insights into cohorts across all channels for both new and returning users. And in this particular instance, returning users was a big pain point for reporting and became a very valuable and vital part of our reporting and strategy. Then data deduplication, of course. We know that across multiple siloed touch points or multiple siloed sources, the conversions can oftentimes be counted multiple times. So when you have a platform like Rockerbox, you're able to utilize customer or transaction ID in order to stitch those together and deduplicate the data to, again, give you a more accurate picture of what's driving outcomes. So now I'm going to hand it back to Alison to walk you through account structure.
Great. And as you can see, our next level, the brown on the bottom, is our account structure. So this may seem like a basic or no-brainer for those who've been in marketing for a long time, But with advertising always changing, there's always a new platform, new campaign types, and you always get those best practices from your reps every quarter or so that are different each time. But we at Bamboo really think you can be strategic about organizing your account so you are prepared for the long haul. A few key items to consider when setting up your structure. First is attribution and measurement. As Malik just went through, and our pyramid says we start with foundational measurement, our account structure should be based on our tools of measurement. First and foremost, does our structure we create have the ability to utilize our data and prove out our program? Are you ensuring your advertising is set up with your key measurement in place? And do you have the structure that will allow you to answer the questions your CMO really cares about? Then next is long-term planning. Since we're focused on long-term, sustainable, efficient growth, we have to consider how our structure prepares us for the future. Does our structure allow us to add new product support, a geographical expansion, or even a new marketing channel? While structures can definitely be changed, starting out with one that takes into account future plans for the company and makes it so a new launch or a change in service, a product update can easily be integrated into the current structure, which of course, would mean you have to know what the future really holds, but hopefully you're planning that and thinking ahead. And finally, keeping it simple. Gone are the days that we used to build out so many specific campaigns for each and every audience, creative, tactic, product, the list goes on. As more and more marketing channels focus on broad targeting and AI, I had to slip that in, it's a hot topic. So ensure you're able to set up your structure with just enough views to understand and report on your program without making it unmanageable. So we'll take a quick high-level example from one of our clients. Again, pretty basic structure for those in marketing, but we're really kind of focused on a high-level 5-tier system to ensure we have the basic breakouts for reporting and tracking, but also to answer some key performance questions. Some of these structures are really common, as I mentioned, breaking out a social versus search view or display, adding region breakouts, but 4 and 5 can then be a little bit more specific to your needs as a marketer. So how do we make sure we break out to see how a creative is doing, or how can we measure and test like new ASC campaigns on Meta and see how they're performing against prospecting? How does a new branding message perform against our tried and true copy? Getting the structure set up is key, but utilizing a solution like Rockerbox can actually really increase the value of your structure and reporting needs. So here we have an example. With Rockerbox, you can actually interchange these views and tiers. So you might want to, on the left-hand side, look at just search as a whole. And you want to understand how brand compares against non-brand, but then look across all of your regions. But then maybe you get a question about how the US is performing against Canada across all of the channels you're on, search, display, social. Having this tool can actually help you just interchange the tiers of your marketing and really make the structure work for you. So now we have a solid account structure in place. We'll get to some of the fun part. So some best practices, but specifically our benchmarking topic. So at Bamboo, we are always ensuring we're up to date on best practices across channels and ads and creative. It's really crucial. But again, things are always changing. So I'm not going to go into a whole in-depth separate webinar topic. And honestly, the best practices right now might change in a couple months from now. But these are kind of where we're at right now. Biggest thing right now, diversify. You've probably been hearing this a lot from your reps if you're already working in the ad space, but both on the ad and creative side, ensuring you're diversifying your media mix is really important. Expanding to channels outside of your bread and butter, think Snapchat, LinkedIn, YouTube versus only on Google and Meta. This helps to reach new audiences you may not get to in your tried and true campaigns. On the creative side, using diversification in your creative, designing with unique channels, placements, and audiences in mind, testing user-generated content, or figuring out how to capture the elusive Gen Z audience. What works as a strategy on TikTok may not resonate the same on YouTube and Meta. So making sure your creative lines up with that is important. And then testing. Once you begin diversifying, make sure you're evaluating your performance. Most advertisers are regular testing copy and creative, but testing incrementality of a channel is also really important as you begin to expand. Many advertising platforms offer their own free tool, which should definitely be taken advantage of, but making sure to also, where you can, use a third-party solution to remove the bias of the channel you're testing through. But either route you choose, you should really consider testing and figure out how that plays into your program. And then focusing on the full funnel. Short-sighted moves like cutting off the top of funnel efforts could potentially cost you more money in the long run. Without bringing in the new customers at the top of the funnel, the lower funnel efforts will eventually run out. Customers that already know your brand will continue to come in from lower funnel tactics, but your pipeline will begin to lessen if you don't keep making a consistent effort to generate new business. And then to kick off our benchmarking topic, ensure you're utilizing benchmarking regularly and updating and evaluating your goals based on the benchmarks to keep up to date. So now that we're here, what is benchmarking? Benchmarking is a way for marketers to measure performance. So there are a lot of different benchmarks to measure against. They can be general industry benchmarks, specific competitors, channels or vendors, and even internal data. Why is this important? Well, we think that benchmarks are there in order to understand how we actually stack up and then utilize that information to make decisions. So some ways we do that are using it as a reference point. When you begin growing, you might not know what success could or should look like. So benchmarking helps you to evaluate during the pivotal moments in your growth plan. From there, we'll plan targets. But what kind of targets are we setting? How do I know what my KPIs for success should be? Or what goals should I have around certain channels or advertising as a whole? Benchmarking can help guide your goals based on what others may be doing and seeing in the field. Planning your yearly or quarterly budgets. How do you figure out where to start? Of course, you can use a baseline from last year, but if this is your first year or you found success last year and you want to understand how to keep being more successful and sustain that growth, or the other not as great factor, maybe we need to reevaluate targets for this year because of last year's performance. Utilizing benchmarks are key when requesting a sign-off for budget approval. And then additionally, testing and experimentation. It can come with so many unknowns, so benchmarks can help you understand where your results stack up against similar strategies. So Malik's going to go into way more detail in a couple slides, but benchmarks really don't have to just be numbers. They can be anything as a reference point that helps you understand your own performance. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different benchmarks you can use. Segmenting, though, these different benchmarks by industry, region, and platform can ensure you're actually stacking up against the right metrics. For example, let's say you're a women's retailer selling dresses and beachwear, but you're measuring yourself against an insurance company on Meta. It's maybe helpful to see that, but it's not really directly measurable. There's going to be so many different factors that go into why someone might resonate with a swimsuit sale versus the need to switch or evaluate an insurance company. So you wouldn't normally compare these two things just because they're using a similar strategy or a marketing channel mix. So you shouldn't probably benchmark yourself against something that doesn't seem relevant. So understanding the actual use cases and scenarios for benchmarking will help the tools be very useful and put them into your growth plan. So I'll pass it to Malik to walk through some of those benchmarks.
Awesome. Thanks. So as Alison just mentioned, I'll be walking through all the benchmarking categories and giving you some details. But I wanted to mention at the top here that 4 of the categories that we're going to be presenting today were outlined by Avinash Kaushik, who's the Chief Growth Officer over at Google. And we'll provide a link to that resource after the presentation. And then we also included one additional category, which is the creative category that we'll wrap up with. And as I go through these categories, you'll notice that the main difference between them is the source, whether it be the benchmark source is first party, second party, third party, or a mix. Some of these benchmarks will be more common and very familiar, others less so. And we'll wrap it up with a case study example of how we asked a vendor for data and then use that to make a budgeting decision. And so now one last item for each category, I'll be walking through high-level insights, then give example sources, and then here on the screen in each slide, you'll see an example use case for each category of benchmark. So starting with internal data benchmarks, this is category 1 of 5, and of course, this is first-party data. There's a tendency really to believe that benchmarks can only be external, but this is actually one of the more common benchmarking categories, whether it's thought of that or not. And many marketers actually use this obviously on a day-to-day basis. So basically, it could be any goal or average you choose to help inform your targets, or even a year-over-year look back, as we'll see in the examples that we provided. So for the first example, we outlined a situation where you're using benchmarks to make daily ops, moving money in and out of campaigns. In that case, you would use goals or a 7-day average reference to make it easier to make these decisions. And it can actually become even easier to make those decisions when you have a feature like what Rockerbox has created that lets you visualize when you need to make those moves. So it gives you a visual cue as to which campaigns are over and underperforming. In the second example, say you're a niche startup that's headed into Q4 and you're looking to set targets without external data to reference. In that situation, you could use a year-over-year report to understand seasonal trends, and assuming all other things being equal, you can set targets to 10 to 15% above baseline to arrive at a somewhat squishy but data-backed target. So that's it for the first category. They're very common, often used. Now we'll continue to talk about industry analyst benchmarks. So this is not to be confused with the industry segment that Alison mentioned a couple slides ago. This category refers to third-party reports that are collected and put together by industry analysts. It used to be the most common benchmarking category that came to mind when you thought about benchmarks. As I mentioned, it's third-party and it's collected mostly via surveys. Most sources are actually reputable these days, but it's still worth checking into the sources on smaller outlets because sampling and self-reported biases can occur. There's no doubt that a lot of math work goes into those efforts, but input influences output more than processing of the data. So always good to verify or compare these benchmarks to others in order to understand the accuracy of them. Some sources can include WordStream, Forrester, Gartner, eMarketer, Statista, and so on. The first use case that we've provided at the top there is, say, a situation where you're conducting a quarterly audit and want to know how others are performing per platform. This is a pretty standard case. Here you could use Statista social media advertising snapshot to understand how you stack up against the industry. And in another scenario, you could actually use this report in order to help inform channel expansion considerations. In the second example, we provided something very similar to the first, but in that it could be used for an audit. But in this scenario, you're looking for a less general KPI like average order value for US Google Shopping. Now that's very specific. So in this instance, it would be very useful to know about sites like eMarketer, since they have a whole library dedicated to search and social marketing KPIs that feature unique breakdowns and metrics. So next on our list, we'll talk about vendor data benchmarks. Vendor data benchmarks are second-party data sources. So own data was first, industry analysts was third, and this is now second party benchmarks. And vendor data is data that comes from a trusted partner, and that's what makes it second party. It can be from internal databases of those companies or publicly available reports such as benchmark reports that are published inside of Google Analytics. These reports are extremely valuable as they're more accurate than can be more accurate than third-party analyst benchmarks and can often be free. Some source examples are Google internal data, Meta internal data, Google Analytics benchmarks, and Rockerbox benchmarks. In the first use case, we have provided on top search demand by region and tactic, and that's data that was pulled from Google's internal database. We'll reference this example again later in our case study after this section, but this breakdown could be used in the scenario where you want to understand how your tactic or geo mix compare to overall demand, helping you make strategy and budget decisions. The second example, we have Rockerbox cross-channel mix, which can be segmented by industry or company size. This would be utilized in much the same way as the first report, just on a larger cross-budget level. This could potentially identify industry trends and spend and help you look for opportunities in channels that might be undervalued. Now, for the sake of time, I couldn't go into all the other vendor-provided performance reports or benchmarks that are available, but we will list a whole source of reports that you could ask your internal vendor reps for. And in specific, we'll list more from Google as well as Meta. And I'll briefly mention them here just to pique your interest. So for Google, we'll be listing competitive benchmarks. That's something you should ask your reps for because, of course, as we're discussing, you want to compare against spend, clicks, and impressions versus competition. You can ask them for mobile speed presentation to help understand the revenue lost and how to repair those issues. You can ask them for industry trends and case studies, a housekeeper report, or even a QBR, which can identify areas of improvement as well as benchmarks. And on the Meta side, you should be asking for a headroom analysis, which can help you understand the scalability of a region or tactic, as we'll discuss later on, and also creative digests that could help you understand the performance of your creative and give you a full review. And again, that's all stuff that you can get for free from your vendors and created by their analysts. So next, we'll continue down the list and discuss competitive intelligence data. This category, this is something that most modern marketers are very familiar with because it comes from sources such as SEMrush, SimilarWeb, SERPstat, or Athena. It's a mix of second and third party sourced information, and something that's interesting and that may not be known to most marketers is that every one of these platforms actually has a data source page where it shows where they source all of their information and how they process it. We'll include those resources in a couple of those resources within the doc that we send after the presentation. And one more insight is that if you are a direct competitor, have less than 50,000 per month in traffic, using these benchmarks using these platforms is often inadvisable. And so it's often better to look at a larger competitor or a larger industry. So the use case examples that we provided are pretty basic considering the robust functionality of most platforms. But in the first example, we reference the site traffic comparison report. And this is useful for setting targets. And then in the second example, we show the channel mix of competitors that you enter. And this is useful for identifying channel mix opportunities, similar to some that we discussed previously. So now let's transition over to the last category and discuss creative benchmarks. So as Alison mentioned at the top, benchmarks don't always have to be a number. It's something that that you could reference in order to help you understand performance. So here we've listed a couple of libraries in order to help you understand that these are available, and you could use these basically in order to go in and identify a specific competitor or topic, and then review what's trending to compare your ads and see how you stack up. So now that we've reviewed all 5 categories, let's take a look at some of the benchmarks in action that we use for one of Bamboo's clients. In this case study, we're going to only review vendor data, since that's the most underutilized benchmark category, and show how effective these benchmarks can be in making budget decisions. So in the summer of 2022, we were planning budgets for Google Ads, and we knew we wanted to continue to invest in brand. Now, in case you're screaming incrementality and you're a big search advocate, we're with you. Just want to note that we had to work with them on bringing their executives along, and we actually had incrementality tests planned for the following quarter. But back to this scenario, they had a hard $250 CPA and a 5% overall testing budget that was allocated. So with that, we asked our reps for 3 reports that helped us to answer 3 questions. The first, can we continue scaling brand in Canada? And for that, we used the Google Ads search volume by regions report. The second question that came from that report was, if we need to shift to scale brand to the US, which competitors should we reference to target #1 search exposure in the category? For that, we use the Google Ads branded search volume report. And then the third question that we had was how is spend being distributed by our competitors within the US generics? And for that, we use a competitor spend across channels report. So now we'll review the specific reports, the insights that we were able to gather, as well as the action that we took from those reports. The first report was, as I mentioned, search demand by region. The insight that we were able to gather was that we couldn't continue to scale in Canada brand. We had hit max conversion volume, and so we might consider scaling down a bit in order to reach a bit more efficiency. The action that came from those insights was that we began shifting 25% of brand, 15% of Canada brand went to generics to work on CPE, and 10% of Canada brand went to US brand. So report number 2 was the US competitor brand search. And from that report, we gathered the insight that our company was trending at #2 within the US. And because the company wanted to be #1 within the US, we utilized that report in order to understand which competitor we needed to reference in order to set our targets, and in order to inform our top of funnel channel mix strategy. Finally, in the third report, we used a US competitor generic comparison, and we found that our peers were investing 4 times more than we were. But no action came from that insight because of our hard efficiency goal. And I just included this here to show that benchmarks can be used for reference and might be used at a later date, since we took this insight and then presented it in a couple of in future quarters. So although we use additional industry analyst benchmarks and competitive intelligence benchmarks, you can see from this case study how vendor benchmarks gave us insights necessary to shift budgets from Canada brand to US brand, set targets, and slowly test into US generics. That does it for benchmarks. Now we'll continue to talk about the last part of our efficiency pyramid, and that is scale. So since Scale is such a complex topic with so much variation based on unique context of businesses. We're only going to offer a few generally applicable and universal tips here before we get into the Q&A. The first item to consider is the scalability of the platform. And this references a report that I mentioned earlier, and that is the headroom analysis that you see there at the top left. At lower scale, this is something that you don't really need to consider, but as you scale up, a report like the headroom analysis can help you to inform channel diversification and efficiency decisions. The second tip that we have is a list of abridged pacing tips, and essentially, it helps to understand that when you're when you decide to scale up more than 20%, essentially you should wait a period before making major ops and major budget decisions. But if you continue to scale gradually, that there is no need to, there's no waiting period essentially. So that does it for the overall efficient scale tips. And now I'll hand it back to Alison to talk about takeaways and Q&A.
Yeah, so we have some of these summarized here in two parts. So both for efficient growth and our pyramid that we talked about, as well as benchmarking. So in that pyramid, the key to efficient growth really requires all four stages. It starts with the foundational measurement, layering in a custom account structure, then leveraging best practices across ads and creative, which will then allow you to scale. And in that best practices, that key to benchmarking is really to make sure it applies to your own business. Make sure you're taking into account segments like industry or region. Don't just rely on one source. Seek out multiple sources for your specific needs. As Malik said, you'll have a list from us at the end of this, but keep up your benchmarking as well. Don't just set them and constantly compare benchmarks that are no longer relevant. So if you're keeping all of these things in mind, you can really see how benchmarks can work into your efficient growth program. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We'll do some Q&A, but I wanted to quickly just share a few ways to connect with our team, both at Bamboo and through our website and email, as well as our Efficient Growth Slack community, which is a network of thousands of marketers where you can share advice, exchange ideas, find a new job, all over Slack. So efficientgrowth.com for the community, and we're Bamboo at growwithbamboo.com. It's been great to connect with you guys today. Okay. Looks like we got one question. How often and when should we be refreshing our benchmarks, quarterly, monthly, based on client preference, etc.? I can start, and then Malik, maybe you can jump in. I think it depends on which benchmark you're referencing. So I would say for something like creative, looking at a more frequent, like monthly or quarterly view. So channels like TikTok and YouTube and Instagram are changing so quickly. So keeping up on the trends and even like placements and the nuances that go into some of those, I think you have to be refreshing pretty frequently. That's going to look a little bit different. Again, the benchmark isn't data driven in that aspect necessarily. And then I would say for some of the other ones, competitive, intelligent, I think you really want to know what your competitors are up to. There's scripts you can run on Google, for example, that you can get a weekly readout of where your competitors are. But just getting a pulse on like at least a monthly basis of just what they're doing is important. And then for budgets, I would say it really depends on how often you're evaluating your own budget. So are you getting budgets for the whole year and they're strict and set in stone? Then I'd say, the couple months prior to that, really evaluating where the platforms are at, your past year looked like. So you would do that before your year. But then if you're able to shift whether quarterly or monthly, then I would be pulling those more regularly to evaluate if they're still working. If I missed anything, Malik, jump in.
I think that's, you pretty much covered it. I'll just add one small item is just, if you're considering your own data or even the vendor / industry data, that's something that you can check in on monthly or quarterly again, but you could ask your rep for a regularly updated report there in order to help you reference that and check your own performance against it.
And let's see, are there any specific industries or verticals where benchmarking can be more challenging? Yeah, I would say from my perspective, it would probably be something that is either more limited in your competitors, whether you're like a newer competitor or new to the market, that can be more difficult, as well as like if you're a more traditional retailer and you're focused more on out of home or something that's less measurable. So in the first category, I would say like if you don't have competitors if you don't even have a competitor or you don't have ones that are similar sizes, it can sometimes be hard to benchmark yourself. And so then I think you have to use stuff like, channel and vendor ones. So getting stuff from your Meta or Google rep as an approximation of a size that's relevant to your industry, but you can kind of baseline yourself against, even if it's not your direct industry, other industries. Some of the more general like industry analyst ones can group things together maybe at too high of a level. And then for traditional retailers, I think this one can just be really hard when you don't have as much direct measurable data. So the benchmarks are going to look a little bit different. Maybe you're the first one to get into, the online marketing field. So you're basing it off of a similar retailer or company, but it won't be quite apples to apples. So your benchmarks might not look quite the same. And it's a little bit of a guess and play for a bit. But Malik, let me know if you have thoughts there.
Press the wrong button. Yeah, no, that again, you pretty much covered it. And yeah, that's really why we include the first own data category as well as the vendor category, because you want to look to that first and that second source really at that point in order to try to understand, like, hopefully a platform might have a second sourced benchmarks for you to reference, or the actual rep that you're working with. So yeah, nothing more to add there.
Great. And then got one for what are the key available metrics to look at in a competitor analysis? Malik, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I think this could be really divided into general and then more tactical type of metrics to look at. For general metrics, you can look to things like spend, you can look to impressions, and you can even look to overall creative that your competitors are actually implementing or actually creating. But then things that are more tactical or things that are more specific to, say, a channel or, say, a specific source, those are things like average order value, ROAS, or CPA that could help you understand how you should be performing and how you stack up against the overall industry.
Yeah, and I think if you talk about, if we go back to the non-data traditional benchmarks, if we look at creative, it's understanding like what are the types of creative that your competitors are running. Do you find them intriguing? Like, are they testing new things that you haven't looked at? Does it seem like it's working for them? Are they engaging? So getting some ideas from that can be really helpful as well on the creative side. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for having myself and Malik and the Bamboo team. Very excited to be here, and hopefully everyone has a great rest of their summer camp.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Bamboo team. That was awesome. Thank you so much for that great presentation. Great comprehensive slides there. I don't know how it is the end of the day almost, but here we are at our last, almost at our last session for the day. And it's going to be a really exciting one, the state of Rockerbox. We teased it, Ashley and I teased it just a tiny bit this morning in our LinkedIn Live. So if you saw that, you know a little bit about what it's about, but it's going to be a great session with Rick. So we're going to hop over there in just a few minutes. Join the link in your email. Ashley, before we hop off, anything about any thoughts about the Bamboo presentation here?
Yeah, ultimately, I think it was a great session. I think I've said that every time you've asked me how a session went.
Yeah.
But I think that the benchmarks that were offered, were really great. I think there are often a ton of questions around what exactly you should do to build a benchmark framework. And the Bamboo team really walked through some really actionable slides. I actually think the second to last slide and like the main presentation is one that if I were a brand operator, I would probably like make that the background for my computer. It was just super actionable. And I appreciated the emphasis that Bamboo always places on efficient growth. There's just so much synergy in growing efficiently and leveraging a measurement partner like Rockerbox to really understand what's working for your brand in the smartest way possible. I was trying not to use the word efficient again, but overall, I think it was a great session and ultimately an amazing first day of summer camp. I'm really looking forward to this last session with Rick and running into tomorrow.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, this is a great chance. If there's a colleague you think could benefit from summer camp, there's still time. They can sign up on the summer camp landing page and watch this last session for the day, and then everything tomorrow as well. I keep forgetting we have a whole packed day tomorrow. Also, with another great end of day keynote from Ron, our other co-founder, on the future of Rockerbox.
Yep, absolutely. And there was one question here in the chat. All of these sessions, the recordings are going to be available sometime next week. We'll email those out to you all. And in terms on the individual slides, we'll be working with the presenters to get access to those, and we'll get them to you one way or another, either via email or if all of the slides are something that the presenters want to make available to you all as like a download, we'll do that as well. So we will follow up on all of that and make sure that you guys have access to all of these great resources.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you guys over in the state of Rockerbox. Bye.